This is the GKD Mini Plus, one of my most anticipated devices of last year. And oh boy do I wish it was good. Hello and welcome to Retro Breeze. Here's the GKD Mini Plus. This was one of my most anticipated devices toward the end of 2022, and promised a cute and compact design along with a unique analog stick attachment, providing extra flexibility. I was super excited when I received this just after Christmas from keepretro.com. First, let's go over some specs. The Mini Plus has a 3.5-inch 640 by 480 pixel display. It has a pretty hefty Rockchip RK3566 processor, a 3000 mAh battery, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, OTG support, dual motors for rumble, and dual stereo speakers. Overall, it seems like a pretty good package, especially with that pretty hefty processor. So let's go ahead and unbox this really quick. Right off the bat, in a kind of bizarre thing, is that other reviewers who have received this item got the analog stick attachment in its own box, but mine just came loose in here. Oh well, whatever I guess. And here's the GKD Mini Plus's box. I'm just not going to comment on this weird dystopian design, and just get straight to the device itself. Of course, you get an instruction manual and a USB stick in the box as well. So here's the Mini Plus itself. It has a very distinctive yet simple design, with boldly rounded corners, and the screen with rounded corners as well. It is a very, very nice looking device, with a very toy-like design, which is fun and I like it a lot. Although I do instantly feel like the very angular D-pad is a bit of a contrast to the rest of the device, which is all soft and rounded. I would have preferred a rounder D-pad just to match the rest of the style. Kind of a nitpick though. On the other hand, I'm really not the biggest fan of the red and greenish buttons here on the white model. They just don't really scream fun to me with these dullish colors. All of the buttons feel pretty nice and have inset, well-rendered labels. There are two function buttons and start and select on the front, and on the left side there's two additional buttons which we'll talk about a bit later. On the right you have your volume up and down, on the top the power button and dual SD card slots, and finally on the bottom there's a USB-C slot and a headphone jack. Both the D-pad and the face buttons are membrane style, with a soft press but a firm clunk at the end. The D-pad in particular feels really good, with a nice amount of pivot and travel. The face buttons also feel very tactile and thunky as well, really nice. Around the back there are four shoulder buttons which are very clicky with a hollow sounding click. They are very shallow and heavily slanted. In the hands, the GKD Mini Plus feels odd. I don't know exactly why, but it feels very wide, especially for being a compact vertical device. And I wasn't really sure how to hold it at first. It feels really chunky and really thick, which I suppose it is really. The small space for the buttons at the bottom present a real challenge for getting a good grip on the device. Either I hold it from the bottom with a kind of unstable grip, or I tend to press my hands against the sides, and neither of these two methods are particularly comfortable. In addition, there is a large distance between the buttons and the shoulders on the back, and the shoulders are so small and so slanted that they don't provide a good resting place for the fingers at all. In fact, my fingers slide off routinely while I'm playing this device. I end up having to keep my fingers at almost over a 90-degree angle just to access R2 and L2, which definitely makes my fingers ache very quickly. It's just really weird that such a compact device feels so big and awkward in the hands. I feel like the ergonomics were completely thrown out of the window just to get this very distinctive look, and that's really not a good thing. This area of my palm, known to some as the Mount of Jupiter, feels sore after holding the GKD Mini Plus for a while, which is just a really weird place to feel sore. I think it's because I don't often put any pressure on that area in particular, but I really do when I hold the GKD Mini Plus. It's quite simply just not comfortable to hold in almost any way. I feel straighter shoulder buttons might rectify this problem somewhat, because they'd give your fingers somewhere proper to rest, but I'm not really sure that would do a whole lot to fix it. The whole design just is not very comfortable at all. Oh, and this thing rattles like a maraca. Listen. Usually on these devices, it's the shoulder buttons that rattle, but no, even covering the shoulders, it still does. Covering the face buttons, still does. D-pad, still does. Only when I cover every single button on the device, on the sides and on the front and on the back, does it stop rattling. And that is just super annoying. I really didn't think something that sounds so petty would annoy me so much, but when I pick this up and it's just rattling around, it just makes it feel really, really cheap. Other verticals like the RG35XX and the Miu Mini also rattle a little bit, but you can just hold your fingers on the shoulder buttons and it will stop, which is much easier to deal with than every single input rattling around. So anyway, let's go ahead and power this thing on. Or not, because even though I fully charged it and powered it off a day before recording this footage because I knew I was going to do so, it seems to be completely out of battery. I am very meticulous about this, and I know I charged it to full and I know I powered it off, so this really baffled me. However, it gives me a good opportunity to share this footage. When you plug it in, the red charging indicator bleeds through the thin white plastic. Just another thing that makes it a little cheap feeling. And for goodness knows why, you actually cannot power the device on while it is charging, regardless of the level of charge that it has. Instead of powering on, it will just give you a battery error, which is just a really weird and uncomfortable error message to get. So you actually have to unplug it, then power it on, then plug it back in. Again, just another kind of small but really annoying thing to me. Alright, so here we are in the stock OS, and unfortunately it looks like it's all in Chinese, but actually it's on English mode here. However, there's effectively no translation at all. It's actually shameful that they call this English, and other languages other than Chinese are all the same. There's barely any localization at all. However, interestingly, there's actually a lot of customization to be done in this OS, including the colors of various elements, fonts, wallpapers, etc. But none of it really seems worth it to me in particular, because hardly anything else in the OS is localized. Oh, and there are some stolen art wallpapers too, which always ticks me off but never surprises me with these devices. Anyway, the games are in sections: arcade, handhelds, home consoles, then PC ports, etc. And I actually really like this setup, and I wish more of my devices would categorize these systems like this. The game list is pretty standard, but you'd better not have too many games because the OS completely freezes while loading the lists in some cases. Like the NES list on mine. It seriously freezes for like 20 seconds. However, the list that you get is akin to a file browser, so it shows all folders, and pressing B goes up a level instead of going back to the system list, which is just unintuitive and annoying. You press start to go back to the system list instead. Alrighty then, I guess. Let's jump into a PS1 game. Crash, why not? By default, the screen is squished to a very narrow view, which is really weird for a primarily 4x3 system. It should fill out the entirety of the screen, so let's go into the settings here and see if we can change it. Well, I guess not. Literally all the functionality of these emulators and the settings, save states, and more are all completely in Chinese, despite this being set to the English language. So there's nothing I can do here other than trial and error. Let's try a different game. Dragon Ball GT Final Bout is in full screen, which is good, until you get to the 3D part, and then it gets squished again, which is just such a weird issue. 2D games, like this game, Disney's action game featuring Hercules, look and run just great. So I'm really not sure what's up with the 3D thing, but personally I have not been able to fix it, and it is present on all 3D sections of PS1 games. Thankfully other systems are fine, like Mega Drive here, and it is honestly really fun to play. However, again, if you want to change any settings or make a save state or anything like that through the menu, you're completely stuck. So it seems obvious to me that the Lovely Child operating system is not designed to be used by anybody who cannot read Chinese. Thankfully though, we have Emulation Station as an alternative, so let's switch over to that. To do so, you can either select it from the menu here, or you can hold A as you boot the device. And this is really inconvenient because you literally need to hold down the button until the ES logo appears, every single time you turn on your device. I haven't found any way to set this to happen automatically, so if you find one, let me know. Emulation Station is a pretty standard setup, and much more usable. It is quicker and much more responsive than the Lovely Child OS, with basically no lag in any of the menus. However, it is also set to Chinese by default. Thankfully we can actually change it, and I'm going to show you how. From the main screen, press Start to enter the settings menu. Go down to the fourth option that starts with UI, then scroll to the third option and press A to bring up the language list. Press A on your language, then press A again to restart Emulation Station, and then it should be in English or whatever language you chose. Alright, so here we are in Emulation Station, in English, and this is a pretty common Linux-based OS, so it might be familiar to some people. Let's go ahead and start playing some games. Here's Sonic Advance, and if you look carefully, there's actually a scanline overlay enabled by default. This applies to basically every non-3D system on this device, and it looks really bad. I really don't like it, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. If I press the two functions buttons to bring up the menu, we'll discover that RetroArch is also set to Chinese by default. Okay, let's change this. go down to the third option with the cross to close the currently open game. You must do this or you won't be able to save the settings. Now go back out and go to the gear icon, which is for settings. Go to the second to last option, which should be an icon of a little person. Go down to the bottom option to change the language. Now go back, go to the top menu with the Space Invader icon, scroll to Configuration File and click Save Current Configuration. Finally, quit RetroArch and then reopen your game. Now let's disable the overlay. Bring up the menu, scroll down to On-Screen Overlay and disable it there. There we go, it's nice and crisp now and it looks absolutely great. And oh yeah, don't forget to do that on every single system you open. Yes, that's right. Anyway, I've gone through all of this in this review video because it really highlights how much this device is not a beginner-friendly device at all by any stretch of the imagination. You have to do substantial legwork in order to get almost anything on this device to a remotely enjoyable state. The software is really, really awful by default, and certainly was not ready to go out to consumers at all. I sincerely hope that GKD plan to fix it, but given how much work it appears is left to do, I'm doubtful it will ever reach an acceptable place. And I have to mention this as well. This particular build of Emulation Station is actually a hack of an open source community firmware called Jealous. And as far as I've heard, if I'm wrong let me know in the comments, the community developers of this firmware offered to make it for the GKD Mini Plus, but GKD refused. Then they took the software and hacked it onto their device anyway, and this is the result. I don't need to tell you that this is really awful practice by open source standards, and just by moral standards as well. And I think the device has really suffered for it because this particular implementation of the software just isn't very good. Alright, well I guess it's time for me to test out some games. The GKD Mini Plus can play all the retro systems you expect very, very well. From Game Boy to Super Nintendo to Mega Drive to Game Boy Advance, all of it. There is absolutely no surprises with performance at this level. It's just all pretty good. And that's to be expected with the pretty hefty RK3566 processor. When it comes to 3D games, PS1 and Dreamcast both run very, very well. Soul Calibur here was pretty much a perfect full-speed experience for me. And I gotta admit, I had a lot of fun playing this. I ended up playing a full arcade mode, which I really haven't done for a while. And that is in large part to the lovely, lovely screen. Everything looks very sharp and colorful, and the viewing angles are very good. I think the calibration of the screen is really good too, because colors that are supposed to look natural like they do in Soul Calibur a lot, look very, very natural, but the bright colors are very punchy as well. It really is a great screen. And while I was playing Soul Calibur, I was feeling really positive about this. Even the speakers are pretty much fine for a device like this. They're not terrible. They're not mind-blowing, but they're definitely not terrible either. Unfortunately, I found that sleeping the device with any Dreamcast game running freezes the entire system and you have to reboot it. Ouch. And then I forgot to hold A while it was booting and it booted into Lovely Child, and then I had to reboot it back into Emulation Station. Ugh. Anyway, N64 performance is pretty respectable, but it does have a few emulation issues and can be generally slow. There's no texture filtering by default, which makes pretty much everything look very pixely and bad. You can probably change this in the settings, but do you really want to have to tweak around with this? And here's something kind of weird that I started to notice at this point. It seems to render 3D very, very dark. In this game Lilac Wars, aka Star Fox 64, I could barely see anything at all in the cockpit view, even with the brightness turned to max. I also noticed this on Ocarina of Time as well. It's really bizarre, but there definitely seems to be an issue with rendering here. Anyway, outside of that issue, I think you could probably play most N64 games at like a 70% enjoyment rate. It's a pretty okay experience. Not great by any means, but pretty okay. I do feel like you're bound to be a little disappointed though. I think this processor could probably do a bit more in terms of N64. And you know what, I just cannot get over this. I don't know if it's my imagination, but even PS1 seems to be really dark in 3D scenes. Look at Spider-Man 2. It's barely visible at some points. And even Crash 3 just does not seem to be as bright and vibrant as it should be, and as Soul Calibur was on Dreamcast as well. At first I thought this might be a brightness issue, but in the weeks I've been testing it, I've really felt like anything 3D other than Dreamcast and PSP just seems to render really dark. It doesn't really show up on camera well either, but just trust me, I really feel like it's there. If you're watching this and you have a GKD Mini Plus, please tell me if you feel the same, just to make sure I'm not going absolutely crazy here. As for PSP performance, the performance itself is pretty good, but there's absolutely no point me mentioning it, because neither regular save games or save states are possible at all. And to top that all off, PPSSPP is of course in Chinese by default too. This is just embarrassing at this point. PSP is straight up unplayable. What an absolute waste. During gameplay, the GKD Mini Plus does okay, and if you're playing a game that works well, you might get some enjoyment out of it at first. But these design issues creep in pretty quickly. The slick, angled triggers, which are just too uncomfortable to hold in intense scenes, the hard-to-reach L2 and R2, and of course the overall blocky shape, which made my hands sore. Even if I was somewhat enjoying myself while playing, I quickly started to wish I was just playing this game on something else instead. One thing I do really want to mention is the 2 additional buttons on the left side of the device. These allow you to rotate it to a horizontal position and play vertically oriented arcade games. It's not really an ideal experience, but this is definitely my favorite thing about the Mini Plus. It's just a really unique feature that does effectively work, although it is a shame that you have to remap all the controls yourself, and doing so is not really intuitive at all. In fact, I actually got stuck in the RetroArch menu when I remapped up and down and didn't remap them to anything else. I just wasn't able to navigate the menu anymore. So you can fix that by going into the RetroArch config file on a computer, but it's not an ideal experience. Again, this is an area where it proves that the GKD Mini Plus is not a beginner device at all. So what about this analog stick attachment? Well, the attachment itself works very well. No setup is required, no remapping or anything. Just plugging it in and it will just work. Both the left and the right stick work perfectly, and you can plug in your charge cable and your headphones with it attached. However, the build quality on this thing is absolutely shocking. Mine had rubber pieces missing out of the box that I had to find and reattach, and they come off nearly every single time I take the attachment off of the GKD Mini Plus. Also, these plastic pockets just get full of dust and grime so quickly, it seems to just magnet to it. Add to that the completely static USB connection that feels like it will break at any moment, and this is really not looking good. Connecting the attachment is, well, just watch this. Yeah, this is awful. It's stiff, it requires excessive force, and it feels like it's gonna break. And removing it is exactly the same, with the addition of losing those 2 rubber pieces. And to top all of that off, it actually scratches the GKD Mini Plus. The very first time I used it, the Mini Plus was permanently scratched. This is so ridiculously bad. The design is just horrible. Why would I use this if it's going to permanently scratch my device? And also, with the build quality I'm seeing here, I doubt the attachment and the USB connection on it is going to last either. The cherry on top of all of this, the white plastic is actually a different shade than the device itself, so it doesn't even look right. Well, once you have it attached, and you have it in your hands, the attachment makes the GKD Mini Plus face buttons and D-pad feel a little bit better, because you have more grip underneath and at the back. But using both analog sticks or the shoulder buttons with this thing on is just horrible. You have to stretch too far from the stick to the shoulder button. The sticks are just a little bit too low compared to the rest of it. Honestly, absolutely everything about this attachment is utterly terrible, except that it requires no software setup. And honestly, the Mini Plus is just too uncomfortable without it, and just as bad when you have the attachment connected and you want to use the analog sticks. For a dual stick setup, this is a vastly inferior experience to something like the RG353V. And it is also substantially larger than that when all is said and done as well. Honestly, I realistically cannot imagine that anybody will actually enjoy using the GKD Mini Plus with this analog stick attachment. It is just a horrible setup, and I'm actually shocked that they designed it this way, and of course shocked that it damages the device itself. It's absolutely embarrassing. So anyway, I've been here a while, so I'm going to wrap up my review with my likes and dislikes and my overall impressions of the GKD Mini Plus. Starting with my likes. The visual appeal. It's a very good looking device, and very cute and playful as well. The screen is really nice. It's bright, colourful, but also hits those natural tones really well. The vertical mode, in theory, is good, but it requires a bit too much legwork to get working properly. And the general performance, which is decent across the board, because it has a pretty good processor in it. And now for my dislikes. Literally everything else except for what I just mentioned. The GKD Mini Plus is uncomfortable to hold in any way and any configuration. The build quality is awful. The rattling issue is really annoying. The weird battery messages and the inability to power on while charging is just so weird. You cannot power the device off by holding the power button anyway, you have to do it through a software menu. The software is absolutely embarrassing. They stole it, and even then they were not able to get it to work properly. There is absolutely no localization in the software at all either. PSP is completely broken and you cannot save any game or any save state. The device is not even remotely beginner friendly. This is an advanced level device, and even then it's still terrible, even for people who know their way around this kind of device. The weird dark rendering on N64 and PS1, and additionally the pixely rendering on N64 as well. The squished PS1 rendering in some cases. The apparent complete lack of any kind of design intuition that causes this device to be completely uncomfortable. It causes the analog stick attachment to damage the device. There just seems to have been no real thought gone into whether this is going to be comfortable or whether it was going to work right. And finally, the fact that there is almost no possibility whatsoever of community support and custom firmware because they stole that firmware originally and refused the community's offers to help. I just don't really think anybody's in the mood to support this device after that. So I really do feel like what you see here is what you're gonna get, for now and probably forever. Overall, it feels like almost no care whatsoever went into making the GKD Mini Plus feel like a cohesive, quality device. Everything good about it, like the screen, the general performance, and the cute aesthetic, is marred by like 20 bad points each. There's no denying that the GKD Mini Plus is a really terrible device, and the software is absolutely terrible, at least if you can't read Chinese, that is. I think that some people may find a small amount of fun if the shape happens to be comfortable in their hands, but the overwhelming software issues, the cheap construction, and the honestly god-awful analog attachment make the Mini Plus just a really, really bad device overall. And it's a darn shame too. For an extreme price of $150 or more for the complete set shipped, I expected far, far more than this. In summary, I don't recommend the GKD Mini Plus for absolutely anyone. This device is just completely dead on arrival. It is truly terrible. The Anbernic RG353V, or the VS, is a vastly superior device to this in every way imaginable if you want a slightly powerful device with dual analog stick. You'll even save a little bit of money with these as well, and they're just so much better. And that wraps up this very unfortunate review. I really honestly don't like talking negative about anything. I try to be really positive, but this is just plain bad. And I honestly feel kind of sad for anybody who has pre-ordered this or the GKD Classic, because I feel like that will also be a terrible device. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you have one of these or have it pre-ordered? Any questions about it? Do let me know. And if you like this video, please leave a like on it, subscribe to my channel and ring that notification bell for more reviews and videos like this. This has been Shem from Retro Breeze, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.